Hey guys, today I wanted to go over a guide on how to make budget EDH decks. I'm a big fan of making budget decks. I think that EDH is a format that's meant to be played by everyone and therefore should be accessible to everyone, which includes costs, certainly. Especially, I know I got into Magic at a pretty young age, and at a young age, I was priced out multiple times by all sorts of people. I'd be playing the game, and all of a sudden, bam, Eldrazi Titan, $40 at the time or 50, and you're like, what is happening? This is not enjoyable. And so, but now that I'm a bit older, it helps me to look back and realize you can make decks that are a lot cheaper than you'd think that are still pretty good. This is one of the decks I've made. I actually really want to get it one day. I've been making a collection of all the color combos possible, which does include colorless. And this is going to be my Boros deck whenever the day comes. Um, but the first thing I want to talk about when talking about uh, making a budget deck is making and looking at your commanders, right? Um, so Joe is not actually a bad idea, but let's look at the top two, the past 2 years, the top 100, because when you're making a budget deck, it's important that your first step is you choose a budget price. This is what's going to help keep you constrained because otherwise, while you're making the deck, it is going to jump $1 million. I know it's happened to myself. You need to make sure you're not going over your budget limit, or at least in the end. So, looking at the top 100, you're looking for when you're going to make a budget deck, if you want it to be good, especially, you're looking for your commander to have a very strong ability that changes how the game is played for you. Um, and also takes cards and makes them better. So, for example, a really good option, Yuriko the Tiger Shadow. One, Commander Ninjutsu, absolutely stupid, completely ignore commander attacks. But whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to its CMC. That is a really good ability. It makes all of your ninjas have that ability, not just her. So any ninja that has unblockable, which most of them do, will be able to do this. And all of a sudden, let's see here if we click on Yuriko and look at EDH Rec. Let's look at some of the best cards. High synergy card right here. 4 cents. Creatures you control with power toughness 1 or less can't be blocked. It's a 4 cent card. Two mana, 1/3. Doesn't seem very good. He's not even a ninja, but because of the way that the deck plays, he makes the ninjas actually worth the price. Even Thousand Face Shadow, 79 cent card. Sure, that's close to $1, but still pretty good. It creates a copy of something. So that's already pretty good. But on top of the fact that you could just play it for one and still have it have the ability of Yuriko. So looking at all these cards, you can see why, Ornithopter finds a home in this deck because it's a really easy way to get your commander out onto the battlefield turn two, right? Same here. It's not a ninja, but it has the same thing happen. So, all right, going back to my example though. Our commanders here are going to be Arden, Intrepid Archaeologist, and Rograk, Son of Roga. I will read them for you really quick. So Rograk, Son of Roga is really simple. He's a 0 mana commander with First Strike, Menace, and Trample, and Partner. And he's a 0/1. Obviously, face value seems pretty terrible. Not going to be able to do anything. But we pair him with Arden, Intrepid Archaeologist. Beginning a combat on your turn, you may attach any number of auras and equipments you control to target permanent or player. Partner. This is great. So all of a sudden, we can take equipments that have massive equip costs and completely ignore that. And we can do that for as many as we want. So taking these combinations, you have a very nasty Voltron deck all of a sudden because you have built in First Strike, Menace, and the big one, Trample. And then you have Arden, who takes all of these equipments that people would never usually play because of their giant equip cost and makes them equip for 0 effectively. So we're gonna when I build a budget deck, I do like looking at EDH Rec. However, you have to realize EDH Rec is going to have the cards that everyone plays, and most people tend to not play budget. So if we scroll down here, yeah, look, new cards, Mythical Coat. It's a $9 card almost. You're not going to be able to afford that if you're trying to do like a So let's just give you the price point. It's a $25 deck. So if you're looking for a $25 deck, you can't run Mythical Coat. That's already a third of your deck price out the window. Nahiri, once again, good card. All of these are good cards, but none of them fit our price point. The only one who does is Mary. But see, here's the thing: EDIH Rec is also going to recommend cards that are in the theme of what you're playing, but they don't actually go towards your win condition. So Mary is a cool card. She has first strike as long as she's equipped. She has haste. She's a 2/2. And whenever she attacks with a legendary creature, draw a card. The only thing on that creature that we care about is whenever she attacks with another legendary creature, draw a card. Best case scenario, she's going to draw us a card. Maybe twice. Because, turn 1 Rogue Rack, turn 2 Mary, swing, draw 2 cards. Sure, maybe that's useful, but I'd much rather spend my second turn casting an equipment, because as a Voltron deck, you don't have a lot of time to sit around looking for value. You're trying to kill people. So, high synergy cards. These two areas are huge: new cards and high synergy cards. High synergy cards, especially, if you can get any of these, I would highly recommend it, just within a certain price point. So, for example, SRAM, wonderful card for this kind of a deck. Equipment has a big issue of we're not going to be drawing a ton of cards. So SRAM will draw us cards whenever we play equipment. So we'll play an equipment, draw an equipment, play an equipment, so on and so forth. Open the Armory. It's a very specific tutor, but in a deck like this one, where you're looking for only equipment, it's huge because you can find the one equipment in your deck that's really, really good. Akiri is really good. She is much better than Mary because, one, she helps you draw, but she can also help prevent one of the biggest issues that you face when you play Voltron, which is your commander getting killed. Now, Rograk naturally does that because it costs 0, a lot easier to repay. However, Akiri is still useful. So, some things to note is you also don't want a lot of overlap. So, especially with your commander. So, look at Pure Steel Paladin, for example. An equipment entering the battlefield, drawing a card, big deal. Very good. It's basically the same thing as SRAM, except SRAM gets around having your spell countered. But let's look at its second ability. Equipments you control have equipped 0 as long as you control 3 or more artifacts. Now, that's actually useless in our deck, because our den already does that for us. And when you play Pure Steel Paladin, it's a $6 card. The reason that it is $6 is not its first ability. Otherwise, SRAM would be $6 too. It's because of that Metalcraft ability. And so we don't want to play that card because we're not getting the $6 that we're putting into it out of it. In other Voltron decks, I might recommend it, but not in this one. A great one, Rayab Mastersmith. Literally pennies, but he gives your equipped or enchanted creatures double strike. Double strike, big deal, especially if you already have trample. Wonderful 2-drop. Great. Now, I'm going to show you an example of what I would like to call a trap card. Ketis Emberclaw Familiar. This guy, he's really, really cool. And honestly, I understand why people run him, but it deals damage. So when your commander deals damage to an opponent, combat damage specifically, Ketis deals that much damage to each other opponent. But that doesn't count as commander damage. It doesn't. It counts as normal damage. And when you're playing a Voltron deck, that's not really useful because unless it's just not worth the $1 that you're paying. Same thing, Armored Sky Hunter, not a bad one, but it's 4 mana to hopefully hit into a equipment card or an aura. Not bad, but for the dollar, meh. Scarred Aid, once again, is doing the exact same thing that Pure Steel is, that we already have. We don't need that. Now, Fighter Class. Fighter Class would be great, and I would love it, but here's the thing. Its 2 following abilities do nothing, and you're paying a premium of $350 for those 2 abilities in our deck when we really only care about the first one. So there's a lot of ways we can replace this card. Sure, it might cost an extra mana, but we won't have to pay $350. Now, here's a good card that I would be willing to shell out the almost $1 value. Because keep in mind, we're building a 25-cent deck, right? For a deck to be 25 cents, $25, every card has to be a 50-cent card or less, sort of. Obviously, you can skew that a bit, but the average has to come out to 50. I would be willing to spend 80 cents for all the glitters because it is a huge pump to your creature. Um, Another one that might be worth it would be Colossus Hammer at $2.78. It's a little bit harder to justify, but a one mana card that makes Rograk a 10/10. All you have to do is give him double strike and give him one more power. Bam, person's dead. Swiftfoot Boots, really good one. Hard to replace because hexproof really keeps it from dying. Swords to Plowshare. Now here's the thing. Oftentimes people are trying to make well-rounded decks, and I understand that. But when you're making a Voltron deck, especially, your ability to be flexible tends to go away. You are built to do one thing, and that is smack people. And so that's what we're focusing on. So I would say Swords to Plowshare, once again, very similar to Ketis. It's a trap. We don't want that. Blackblade Reforged, wonderful card. Sunforger gives it +4. It's pretty good. And lets us also do this ability more consistently because we don't have to pay the equip cost. It's no longer 5 to do this, it's only 2. Boros Charm, always a wonderful card, and honestly, I've considered putting it in, but I did not ultimately. Masterwork of Ingenuity is your best artifact on the battlefield. Um, Best equipment. Thran Power Suit, totally worth it. Yeah. So this is what I would do is I'd go through with this thought, thinking, okay, is this worth it? Is this worth it? You look at the price down here for TCG, at least that's where I buy my cards, and you think about what the card does, and is it worth it? Bruno here is a 17-cent card, but it gives your creature +2/+0 for each equipment attached to it. That's really good. Honestly, second ability, not the best, but because of Ardennes, but it's something there. And for 17 cents, we don't mind because we still want that first ability. So yeah, that's how I would go through here, looking for certain things. So we're going to go ahead and now move over to my deck list. I'll hit details and sort by price. So first things first, both are commanders. They're the price that they're at. Like I said in my previous video, commanders are the thing that you want to spend the most money on, but here it's helpful to have them be less than 50 cents. For the sake of ease, we're going to ignore basic lands, but let's look at some lands that we've threw in just for, sake of having a somewhat better mana base. First things first is Buried Ruin. Gets an artifact back. If you have a really good, equipment that you want back, Buried Ruin's going to help. And this deck is a lot of colorless, so we don't care so much about colorless. Honestly, speaking of which, we might be able to check Command Tower, but at 30 cents, I think it's worth it. This one's great because it's a tutor on a land and it enters tapped. That's the only downside. And to be fair, this is supposed to be a speed deck, but I think the offsuit of finding a equipment and putting it into your hand, and actually aura and equipment, is worth it. Once again, colorless land that gives something double strike for 4 mana. It can really help you finish out the game if necessary. And then this gives something vigilance, haste, and +2/+0. So all 5 of these lands have some use. Command Tower really being the only one that doesn't, just tapping for both of our colors, but it's been reprinted so much, it's worth it. All right, looking at our artifacts here. Boros Signet. Now, the fact that it is $2.34 is not great. I won't lie. I don't know why Deck Stats has a different price here than it does on face value. I don't think Boros Signet runs this high typically, but it is a great 1 mana fixer, and 2, it is a good ramp. Cool. All right, Nettle Cyst. 3 mana artifact. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control. This is 100% worth it. You're going to be playing it on turn 4 most likely because you played Ardennes turn 3. And it's going to take Rograk from a slight threat to all of a sudden, hey, someone's going to be dying this turn. Bloodforged Battle Axe. This card is a wonderful card. The only thing that holds it back is the fact that when you have like 5 of them, you have to pay 10 mana to equip it. With Ardennes, we completely avoid that, and that's why it's such a good card to put in here. Soul Ring, I don't think I need to explain this one. I wish it wasn't $1.63, but I think it's worth paying that much for such ramp early on, especially in such a deck where everything's colorless. Sun Forger. This gives a pretty significant buff to power, which with a first strike commander, we really don't care about toughness. And then being able to find instants and sorceries really helps because you can stop a lot of issues that you might run into. Swift Foot Boots, I already talked about this one. Once again, Masterwork of Ingenuity, I already talked about. Sword of Hours gives 1/1 counters, doubles counters, things like that. Cool. This one is a very specific card that uh, is useful in our deck that lots of other decks don't find useful. So this card in and of itself, to get an effect, if you would want, because you want this on a specific creature. Now, to be fair, it comes in with a 2/2, which isn't terrible, but really you want this on the creature, your commander, right? Which in a normal deck would cost 9 mana, but with Ardenn, it only costs 5. And an extra combat step is effectively having double strike because it doubles your damage that you're dealing. Arcane Signet, Mana Ramp. All right, so there's a lot of these, but basically I have a bunch of equipments in this deck that draw you cards. Having more equipments never hurts, especially with cards like Nettle Cyst, but these cards also help you draw into more ability to deal with stuff because you're going to need more and more equipments as the game goes on to try to keep Rograk alive. All right, Seraphic Greatsword. This is 2 mana for a 2/2, for +2/+2, sorry, but it also gets you an Angel. It's pretty cheap because of an equip 4 cost, but with Ardenn, once again, we get around that. And the Angel, honestly, pretty helpful because a big thing Voltron suffers from is the crackback. Mask of Avacyn, hexproof, hard to beat. Blazing Sunsteel gives it +3/+0, and whenever it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any target. Rograk probably won't be taking a lot of damage, but 2 mana for +3/+0, pretty good. This is probably the all-star of the deck. You double the power of the creature until end of turn when it attacks. It's 3 mana, and you can even cast it as a sorcery for double strike. Sculpting Steel, copy of an artifact. Sword of Vengeance gives it vigilance and haste, and +2/+0. First strike and trample it already has. Inquisitor's Flail deals double damage to and from it, but with first strike, 9 times out of 10, that just means you're dealing double damage to them and they're not dealing any to you. Blackblade, real simple, buffs your creature by quite a bit, especially, and it scales with the game. Locks it on Warhammer. We're looking for the lifelink and the +2/+0. Fire Shrieker's double strike, huge deal. Yeah, so I'm going to keep going through these, but I'm going to show you my favorite example of what we're looking for when we talk about budget. So here we have a 2-cent card called Bronze Sword. It's 1 mana, equip creature gets +2/+0, equip 3. Now, face value, this is terrible, right? But with Ardenn, all of a sudden it's 1 mana, equip creature gets +2/+0, and that's all it takes. Equip 0, basically, right? And this is a great turn 1 play and can really help us get somewhere. Meteoric Mace, +4/+0, big deal. We ignore the equip cost, and it has Cascade. So really, it's going to find us almost certainly 2 equipments. Double strike once again, and its equip cost is 5. Except once again with Ardenn, we ignore that. Great Axe. Now this is my favorite example of this. 1 mana equipment. Equip creature gets +4/+0, and equip 5 with Ardenn. Once again, we completely ignore that, and this all of a sudden becomes a wonderful artifact. Same with Brass Knuckles. Gives something double strike. Usually you'd have to pay 2 extra to equip both Brass Knuckles. This time you don't. Completely ignore that. So yeah, looking down, I mostly focused on this being artifacts, but I did grab a few auras, particularly this one. For $1, we can make Rograk indestructible, and that is a huge deal in a Voltron deck because you don't want your commander to die. It's a huge pain, and it takes you forever to get back online. This is pretty straightforward. It's a tutor, and you get treasure. And then lastly, Hyena Umbra. Now, this card, honestly, the only thing that we care about on it is that it says Totem Armor, which is if enchanted creature would be destroyed, instead remove all damage from it and destroy this aura. Hyena Umbra is basically a one-time indestructibility, and if you're dealing with spot removal, which is really the only thing that's ever going to kill Rograk, Hyena Umbra is pretty useful. Let's see some other things we were able to do here. This is a great example of balancing out your deck, of having a land that's also an instant. And so you can decide what you need there. Commune with Lava is a great late turn draw that doesn't cost a ton. And then this is just a way to save either an artifact, which is one of your equipments, or Rograk. Lastly, we're going to look at some of our creatures. And honestly, these creatures, huge bangers. So we already talked about Rayav, but let's look at real quick. Um, sorry. Ryu Storm Edge, this is the one I'm looking at. So whenever a samurai or warrior attacks alone, untap it. If it's the first combat phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. For 4 mana, we get an extra combat phase guaranteed with Rograk because Rograk's a warrior. This card, not super popular. But with Rograk, all of a sudden becomes great because as a Voltron deck, you really only want to attack with your commander anyway. So yes, this has basically been my sort of deck, but also example of how to build budget. Um, I do think EDH rec is huge, and it's really hard sometimes to figure out what you want to cut and what you don't want to cut. But with a deck like this, I honestly went straight to artifacts, and I thought about putting Argentum Armor in, but you also have to realize what you're playing your strengths to. Rograk, as with your 2.26 CMC shown, is 100% an aggro deck. We can, by turn 3 or 4, be swinging for upwards of 10, 15 damage with Rograk, killing people really early on. And that's the thing with Voltron decks, is it's hard later on in the game when people have removal set up with creatures to block with. And so I think this deck would perform really well. And it's also really fun to play. You get to see all these terrible cards that no one ever gets to see get used because of Arden's ability. And that's really the key to building a budget deck, is getting a commander whose ability makes these terrible cards that no one wants to play, that keeps your deck down in price, and the commander makes them into cards that are worth playing.